It's strange how certain moments carve themselves into your memory, no matter how ordinary they seem at first. That day began like any other, quiet, unassuming, with the kind of late afternoon sunlight that casts everything in a golden haze. I was in my garden, pulling weeds from the rosebed, when I felt it, that sense that someone was watching me. I turned, and there he was, my grandson, standing just beyond the old gate, his eyes fixed on me with a curiosity I hadn't seen in him before. He didn't call out, and he didn't come closer right away. Instead, he followed me silently, like he was studying something about me that words couldn't capture. I didn't say anything either. There was something unspoken between us in that moment, something fragile and almost sacred. I gestured toward the little pathway leading to the back corner of the garden, the place most people never see, where the stone wall is broken, and wild ivy climbs like it's trying to reclaim the land. That was my secret place, the secret garden, I used to call it when I was younger, though it was more than just flowers and vines. It was a hidden corner of my life, a space where I could be myself without the weight of anyone's expectations. I never thought I'd share it with anyone, not even with family. Yet here he was, following me down the uneven stones, his steps slow but steady, as though he knew this was no ordinary walk. We reached the little archway made from two leaning trees, their branches interlacing to form a kind of natural doorway. Beyond it, the air always felt different, still, hushed, as if the garden itself was holding its breath. I stopped there for a moment, brushing the dirt from my hands, trying to decide whether to let him in. Then I looked at his face. He wasn't just curious, he looked invested, like he wanted to understand something about me that had been hidden all this time. "Come on," I finally said, and I stepped through. Inside, everything looked alive in a way that the rest of the yard never did. The flowers grew in wild colors, deep purples, fiery reds, soft yellows that almost glowed in the light. The air smelled of lavender and damp earth. In the center stood an old wooden bench, weathered but still strong, the same bench where I had once sat and written pages in my old journals when I was much younger, dreaming of the life that stretched ahead of me. He followed me to the bench and sat quietly beside me. For a long while, neither of us spoke. There was no need to. The silence felt full, not empty. Birds darted overhead, their wings brushing the air like whispers, and somewhere a breeze stirred the ivy so it shivered against the stone. At last, he turned to me and asked softly, "Why have you never brought me here before?" I swallowed, feeling my chest tighten. It wasn't an easy question. "Because this place is me," I said finally. "It holds the parts of myself I never showed anyone." I wasn't sure if anyone would understand. His eyes didn't leave mine. They were steady, serious, far older than his years. "I want to understand." That simple sentence broke something inside me, something I hadn't even realized was locked away. I looked at him, really looked, and I saw not just my grandson but a person standing on the edge of becoming, someone who wanted to connect beyond the surface of family ties. So I began to tell him little things. How I planted the first roses here when I was younger than he is now. How I used to sneak into the garden at night to look at the stars and write down dreams I never told anyone about. How this corner had carried me through heartbreaks and disappointments, through laughter and tears, through all the moments that had shaped me. As I spoke, I noticed the way he listened, not with the distracted air of someone passing time, but with a kind of reverence, like each word mattered. He didn't interrupt. He didn't rush. He simply absorbed it all, like the garden itself was weaving my words into the air between us. The sun began to dip lower, casting long shadows across the garden. I realized then that something unexpected was happening. An invisible thread was tying us together, something deeper than the simple label of grandmother and grandson. It was as if by sharing this secret place, I had invited him into a part of myself no one else had seen, and he didn't take it lightly. When I finished speaking, he leaned back against the bench, his hands resting loosely on his knees, and he whispered, almost to himself, "I think this garden will always be part of me now too." I didn't answer right away. My throat was too tight. Instead, I let the moment settle, let it stretch and wrap around us like a warm blanket. I realized that what I had just given him wasn't just a hidden corner of land, it was trust, legacy, and a piece of my heart. That night, when I closed my eyes to sleep, the image of his face in the fading sunlight stayed with me. I knew this was only the beginning. The garden had always been a place of solitude, but now it was something more. It was the beginning of a journey neither of us had expected, one that would change both of us in ways we couldn't yet see, and as I drifted off, I couldn't help but wonder what else might grow here now that it was no longer mine alone. The next day I found myself drawn back to the secret garden earlier than usual. The morning light was softer than the evening sun had been, and the dew clung to the petals of the roses like scattered diamonds. I carried a basket with me, intending only to trim a few herbs and perhaps gather some lavender. But I sensed, even before I reached the archway, that I wasn't alone. He was there again. My grandson. Sitting on the old wooden bench, waiting, as though he had known I would come. He looked up when I entered, and there was a quietness about him, the kind that belongs to someone holding on to a thought too heavy to carry alone. "You came early," I said, trying to keep my voice light. He gave me a small smile. "I couldn't stop thinking about this place. About what you told me yesterday." I set the basket down and moved closer. The garden was still wrapped in morning hush, the air cool and fragrant. Birds sang lazily from the trees, and somewhere beyond the wall, a neighbor's dog barked, distant and muffled. "What part kept you awake?" I asked, curious. He hesitated. "All of it. But mostly, the way you said this garden was you." I started wondering if I have a place like that. A place where I can be myself, without anyone telling me what I should be. His words caught me off guard. For a long moment, I only stared at him, feeling the weight of his honesty. He wasn't asking me for answers, he was trusting me with his uncertainty. That kind of trust is rare, even within families. I sat beside him, the wooden bench creaking under our combined weight. "Maybe you don't have that place yet," I said softly. "But you will. Sometimes it takes time. Sometimes it takes years before we find the space where we can simply exist without pretending." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his gaze sweeping across the wildflowers. "I don't know if I'll ever find it." I touched his shoulder gently. "You've already started, just by asking the question. That's the first step. This garden was hidden for so long because I didn't know how to share myself. But now I do. And maybe, until you find your place, this one can belong to both of us." He turned his head slightly, his eyes meeting mine. They were shining, not with tears exactly, but with something close, a rawness that reminded me of how fragile youth can be when faced with the unknown. He nodded slowly. We spent the rest of the morning in quiet rhythm. I trimmed the lavender, and he helped by tying the stems with twine. He asked about each plant, wanting to know their names, their stories. I told him how the rosemary came from a cutting given to me by a dear friend long ago, and how the wild violets had sprung up on their own, claiming a corner I had never planted. It wasn't just gardening, it was storytelling, it was teaching, it was weaving our lives together through the language of roots and blossoms. With every question he asked, I felt myself opening up in ways I hadn't in years. At one point, he held a sprig of rosemary under his nose, inhaling deeply. "It smells like something ancient," he said. I laughed softly. "It is. It's been used for memory, for strength, for courage. People believed it could carry their prayers to the heavens." He looked at the sprig again, thoughtful, and then tucked it carefully into his pocket as though he were tucking away a secret blessing. The sun rose higher, the air warming, and we finally sat down again on the bench. He leaned back, closing his eyes, and said quietly, "I feel different here. Like I don't have to be anyone else. Just myself." Those words touched me more than I expected. I remembered being his age, carrying my own uncertainties, longing for someone to see me as I truly was. Now, years later, here I was, offering that to him. It felt like life had come full circle in the most unexpected way. We lingered there until noon, when the sound of the church bells drifted over the rooftops. As we rose to leave, he turned to me and asked, "Can we come back tomorrow?" I smiled, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "Of course. This place is ours now." That night, lying in bed, I thought about his question, the one that had unsettled me. Did everyone have a secret place waiting for them, or did some of us spend our lives searching? And if so, what did it mean that he had found mine before finding his own? I didn't have the answer. But I knew that whatever journey lay ahead for him, he wouldn't walk it alone. The garden had bound us together in a way deeper than words, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it had more to reveal, not just to him, but to me as well. And for the first time in many years, I felt anticipation stirring inside me, like the garden wasn't just alive with flowers, but with possibilities still waiting to bloom. The following days unfolded with a rhythm I hadn't known I needed. Each morning, he would appear, sometimes before I even made it outside, waiting by the archway like a silent guardian of the garden. At first, I thought it might be a fleeting curiosity, but no, he kept coming, each time with the same quiet eagerness, as though the place called to him as much as it had once called to me. One morning, after several visits, he surprised me by carrying something in his hands. A small notebook, worn at the edges, the cover bent and softened by use. He held it close, almost protectively. I raised my eyebrows. "What's that?" I asked. He hesitated, then handed it to me. "My thoughts," he said simply. I turned it over carefully before giving it back. "Do you want me to read them?" He shook his head quickly. "Not yet. Maybe one day. But I wanted to bring it here. I thought, if this is our place, then it should hold pieces of both of us." His words made my throat tighten. I remembered my own journals, pages now yellowed and hidden in an old box beneath my bed, dreams, confessions, little scraps of myself I had never shared. And here he was, bringing me the most vulnerable part of himself, asking nothing in return except to place it in this sacred space. We found a spot beneath the ivy where the stone wall had crumbled, and together we tucked the notebook into a hollow between the rocks, safe from the weather but close enough that it felt like it belonged. He looked relieved, lighter somehow, as if by leaving it here he had given his worries back to the earth. That day, we didn't speak much. Instead, we worked side by side, he clearing the wild weeds that had begun to creep into the path, and I pruning the roses. At one point, I caught him glancing at me with a quiet smile, and when I asked what he was thinking, he said, "I like knowing that you trust me enough to share this." It was such a simple statement, yet it carried more weight than he could possibly know. Trust had not always come easily to me. Over the years, life had taught me to guard my heart, to keep certain corners of myself hidden. But here, with him, I found myself letting those walls fall piece by piece. Later, as the sun lowered and shadows stretched across the garden, he began asking questions I hadn't expected. Not about the flowers, not about the plants, but about me. "Did you always feel comfortable here? Even when you were young?" "Yes," I said after a pause. This was the only place where I felt like I could breathe without pretending. Out there, I gestured vaguely beyond the wall, the world always wanted me to be something, someone else. But in here, I could just be myself. He frowned slightly, thoughtful. "Do you still feel that way now?" The question startled me. I realized I didn't know the answer. I had spent so many years being what others needed me to be, a mother, a grandmother, a friend, a neighbor, that I wasn't sure who I was anymore outside of those roles. The garden used to remind me. But over time, even this place had grown quiet inside me. Until he came, I think, I said slowly, that I had forgotten how. But being here with you, it reminds me again. His face softened, and he nodded, as though he understood more than his years should allow. "Maybe that's why I like it here too. Because I don't have to pretend." The stillness that followed felt profound. We sat together, watching the last light of the day filter through the branches, the air rich with the scent of lavender and damp soil. It was a silence that said more than words ever could, a silence of recognition, of connection, of knowing that something rare was unfolding between us. As we prepared to leave, he paused at the archway, looking back at the garden. "Do you ever think places choose us?" he asked. I smiled faintly. "Sometimes, yes. Maybe this place chose both of us." That night, I found myself restless. His words echoed in my mind, and I couldn't shake the sense that he was right, that the garden had waited all these years for not just me, but for us together. It wasn't only my refuge anymore, it was becoming a bridge between two souls, one older, one younger, both seeking something unspoken, and for the first time, I began to wonder what would grow from this bond we were tending, not just in the soil of the garden, but in the soil of our hearts. By the time the weekend arrived, the garden had begun to feel different, alive not only with plants, but with a sense of shared history that neither of us could have predicted. My grandson arrived early, as usual, but this time he carried a small bag. I watched curiously as he set it down and opened it to reveal a few carefully chosen items, a sketchbook, pencils, and a small tin of watercolors. "I thought," he said, a hint of shyness in his voice, "that we could make the garden part of our story, in a way that lasts." I felt a warmth spread through me. He was offering more than his presence, he was offering creativity, commitment, a willingness to make something tangible out of our shared moments. I nodded, feeling a lump rise in my throat. I think that's a wonderful idea, I said softly. We found our usual spot beneath the ivy, the bench worn smooth by years of use. The garden seemed to lean in around us, as though it understood the significance of what we were doing. He began sketching the roses, their petals unfolding in intricate, delicate patterns, while I wrote brief notes in my own journal about the memories each corner held. Words and images mingled in the quiet, creating a dialogue between generations, between our pasts and the present. At one point, he looked up from his sketchbook. Do you think people notice small things like this? The moments that really matter? I paused, brushing a stray leaf from my sleeve. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But the ones that matter most, they stay with us, even when no one else sees them. That's why we remember them so vividly. He nodded, as though absorbing every word, and went back to his sketching with renewed focus. I watched him for a while, noticing how his fingers moved carefully, deliberately, across the page, and realized how much he had grown not just in skill, but in presence, in patience, in understanding of subtle beauty. The afternoon drifted into evening, and as the sun sank behind the trees, the garden was bathed in a golden light that made everything look softer, more enduring. He closed his sketchbook and held it out to me. I want you to have this, he said, his voice quiet but firm. So you can remember today, and all the days we've spent here. I took it from him, my hands trembling slightly. The sketches were beautiful, yes, but more than that, they carried the essence of him, the way he had seen the world, the way he had chosen to engage with it and with me. It was a gift I would treasure forever. We sat together in silence for a long while, listening to the gentle rustle of leaves and the distant call of birds returning to their nests. There was a sense of completion in the air, not an ending, but a culmination of months of quiet understanding, of trust, and of shared moments. Before we left, he turned to me and said, I think I understand now why this garden is special. It's not just the flowers or the quiet, it's the way it holds people who care for it, and for each other. I smiled, feeling a tear slip down my cheek. Exactly, I said. And now it holds both of us. As he walked away that evening, I stayed behind for a moment longer, tracing my fingers over the ivy-covered wall and inhaling the familiar scents of earth and blossoms. I realized that in sharing this place, in letting him follow me and witness the hidden parts of my life, we had both discovered something rare, a space where time slowed, where hearts connected, and where memories could grow alongside the roses. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about all the visits, all the quiet conversations, all the small acts of trust that had transformed our relationship. I knew that life outside the garden would continue, with its noise, its demands, and its unpredictability. But the garden had given us something enduring, a shared sanctuary, a symbol of growth, and a reminder that connection could be found even in the most unexpected places. And I smiled to myself, knowing that long after the sun set on that day, the garden would remain alive not just in blooms and vines, but in memory, in love, and in the quiet understanding between two generations who had discovered the beauty of simply being together.